This is The Corner Series, a McGuireWoods series exploring business and legal issues prevalent in today's private equity industry. Tune in with McGuireWoods partner Geoff Cockrell as he and specialists share real-world insight to help enhance your knowledge.
Thank you for joining another episode of The Corner Series. I'm your host, Geoff Cockrell. Here at The Corner Series, we try to bring together deal makers and thought leaders at the intersection of healthcare and private equity to discuss current trends, where the market is going, and lots of other aspects of that intersection. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by my longtime friend, Justin Puckett. Justin is from MB2 Dental. And Justin, if you could give an introduction of yourself and MB2, with that, we could jump into some questions.
Yeah, happy to connect, Geoff, as always. Again, Justin Puckett, president of MB2 Dental. I joined our MB2 and our founder, Dr. Villanueva, coming up on 11 years ago. It was no kind of DSO world existed really back then, and it's truly a provider kind of driven alignment model. And you look today, and we are closing in on 800 practices throughout the country. We employ a joint venture model that's kind of based on provider autonomy. I mean, we kind of, it's been a fun ride. We started out private with, basically no money, very scrappy. We're now on our third financial sponsor and, still trying to grow and solve problems every day. But I'm happy to jump into any other topics and look forward to it.
So, Justin, you mentioned joint venture model, local provider autonomy. There's a lot of different ways that businesses like yours have thought about these questions, both from the perspective of how do you attract and motivate people, how do you connect them to what's happening in spheres that they can control. And some folks answer that question with leaning heavily into topco level equity as being one of the big drivers of alignment. The alternative, of course, is among other kind of levers that you can pull is a joint venture model where their kind of equity ownership is connected at a lower level that's closer to something that they can impact. How do you think about that spectrum, and why have you built your model the way you've built it?
Yeah, I think for us, the local level ownership, it's very simple. I mean, I think dentistry it's different than medical optometry, for example. Every dentist in every market and even sub-markets have their own little niche, their own little way to do things. And we've found, our owners like to control what they can control. A lot of them are entrepreneurs. That's why they pick dentistry over medicine, for example. They focused myopically on that one office. They can drive kind of four-wall EBITDA. They can drive same-store sales. If everyone does that, it kind of goes into the old adage of rising tides lift all ships. And Dr. Villanueva, our founder, his idea was simple. He's like, I want them focused on that specific practice, because if something happens, when we had like 3 or 4 practices, he was just concerned about provider there. And he's like, I didn't want to have to go, I couldn't work 2 places at once. And so that's kind of how it started. And, we do have a small slug of, we want them to have the whole co-equity as well. So they kind of care about the global entity. But, we've just found, again, it's just they can understand and they can drive change in their local office, in their local market. And so for us, it's obviously worked really well. And I think it's resonated with so many of our doctor partners.
One of the aspects of equity ownership is the idea of second bites at the apple. And on the Topco philosophy, and I know that you kind of split yours, that providers would be owners either through rollover or other programs, owners perhaps at Topco level and a joint venture level. At the Topco level, obviously in most businesses, that Topco equity is not cash flowing. As money lands at Topco, it's being used to satisfy enterprise-level debt, it's doing other expansion initiatives, whereas the joint venture aspect of it, where a provider owns at a kind of a sub-DSO, that often is cash flowing. How do you think about the impact of kind of current cash flow from an alignment perspective versus kind of additional bites at the apple in a sale process?
Yeah, I think it's the kind of differentiator. I always use the example, at the end of the month, after even paying our partners chair side, and we pay the rent and, every kind of expense, there's $10 left over and, for that practice, and they own 40%, call it, they get 40% of the $10. And for us, it's the best driver of alignment, and I always use the example, people are like, how do you give so much autonomy to your doctor partners? And I say, it's because we're aligned. They want to order a new scanner. Obviously, it's our job at the DSO level to go secure the best pricing, give them options, work with the manufacturers or the distributors. But at the end of the day, if they feel confident enough, they're going to put up their portion of that money. It makes our job so much easier. It's almost like, why would we say no? Because if they feel that strongly about it, they are doing that because over the long term, their distributions that they get, we do ours monthly, that will grow. And, we do ours monthly and not quarterly. I think our financial team still hates us for doing that because it's an administrative burden, but we want them to feel like the changes monthly, good and bad. If they take a 2-week vacation, there's many times they have to put in a capital call for that month. And then obviously on the inverse, if they implemented some new type of strategy, they tried that new marketing campaign or, whatever example you can come up with, it results in increased volume or increased pricing, they get to feel that effect very quickly. And so that's kind of something we've done since Office One and we still do today. And versus, the bites of the apple, we've found, and again, we obviously believe in that too, but there's so much of that, not even just outside of their control, but it's outside of our control. It's market driven. It's DSOs, interest rates. There's so many different variables there that it's so one moment in time versus this is an everyday focus for them because they know they're going to see those results financially.
How do you balance the local autonomy from an economic perspective against having some form of uniform culture and connectedness to the overall business? Or do you think that that is less important as long as you answer the first question right?
Yeah, I think if you nail the first question, you'll have success, which people like. If everyone's a holdco investor, they like that. Now, that said, we still focus very heavily on the culture piece. I mean, we do and have done since the beginning of time, numerous owners trips a year. And that is purely designed of how do we bring people who have different local cultures into one big MB2 culture, which again, ours is how do we change the digital industry by giving this autonomous model? How do we put best practices in place? Because so many of our owners, they're competitive. They already have phenomenal practices. They're joining us to get better. And so I would say in the past 5 years, we've even seen an additional shift of they want help. They want best practice. They want to know what everyone else is doing. And so, we have like an internal app on their phones because we found they check their phones more than they check an actual email. And, it's constantly going back and forth together, whether that's clinical, whether that's how's this vendor, here's my ROI, is anyone else seeing anything? We want basically our partners helping each other, competing with each other in a positive way, but it's very intentional. We spend a lot of time and a lot of money on small regional events to encourage a specialty share. Large national events, we do 2 a year, which all the owners are invited to, even down to specific submarkets of like the East Valley of Phoenix, about once a quarter, get everyone together. We want them to feel like it's still a small organization, but at the same time be able to take a step back and appreciate that we're now a massive organization.
When you think of growth, how do you balance de novo versus doing acquisitions? What's your thought process on that?
We try to be agnostic and just say what is appropriate for that specific owner, that specific market. Well, this year we'll probably do about 20 de novos. I think we did 15 to 18 last year and did about 100 acquisitions. And so de novos we've found more recently, we are solving for something, meaning maybe it's a satellite office or a second office for one of our owners, or it's, if we have 20 GPs in an area and one of our oral surgeons wants to open an oral surgery office, we'll build it right there. Or it's just frankly a market we've been trying to get in, but haven't been able to find the perfect partner. Because, it's not just acquiring an office, they've got to fit the provider piece. Are they a good partner? How are they top of class clinically? Do we have the same morals, values, beliefs, and kind of long-term vision of dentistry? So we always want to be able to do both. And I think the market will change and do both as well. There will be times when the multiples were crazy, crazy high in an acquisition of maybe the de novo makes more sense from an ROI. Now we're also seeing construction costs are way up, no different than if you're remodeling a home or building a new home. So it's constantly weighing those pros and cons, but we always want to be able to do both if needed.
The growth and acquisition market for larger than those small individual ones that would be selling to a consolidator, the mid-size DSOs got installed, and I think a lot of that stall is related to them looking upmarket at larger DSOs like yourself and others, a handful of others that are much bigger. There's a lot of uncertainty as to where that upstream market goes because ultimately, if there's not a successful path forward for the largest DSOs, the consolidation idea breaks down below it. How would you describe what the future of large DSOs looks like?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. We're obviously very close with one of our current private equity sponsors, Charles Bank. And when we were, recently talking with larger sponsors when we got a deal done last November, they were commenting on how many of the mid-sized groups were actually on the PE side were calling them with that exact thing of like, where does it go from here? because a large buyer, if they're going to buy a mid-sized group, has got to know how they're going to exit. And so I think, obviously if you look at the top four, Heartland, us, Aspen, Pacific, Heartland's owned by KKR. You have, you look at the top 10 private equity firms in the world on size, a lot of them are in dental now. We're with Warburg Pincus. You have so many that are already in dental. Where do you go from here? I think the obvious, one of is, do these go public? And I think you're going to you will see those at some time. I think there are other vehicles that are emerging that, whether that's kind of like a private IPO or continuation funds with these other large LPs, like all these KKR, Warburgs, Blackstones of the world have, massive LPs, and sometimes they're co-investing now. We're seeing that. And so we always just try to focus on, if we are successful in cash flowing and growing, we will have options. But eventually you are going to see these companies go public. It's just someone's got to be able to write that check of that size, and it's got to be a public market.
So with that backdrop, as we're moving further into 2025, do you see the market for mid-size platforms opening up, or is that going to take a little bit longer?
If you would have asked me 6 months ago, I would have thought we would have seen a lot of transactions by this time. But we're just not seeing it. There are quite a few in market right now, but so many are in this long hold period, and it does seem like everyone's kind of waiting on the other shoe to drop. I think the lack of drop in interest rates is for sure playing a factor in that. But yeah, you're just not seeing transactions. There's some great examples of guys going to market and just they pull out. There's no buyers. And so we have a lot of people sitting on the sidelines that something has to happen. I know we're, I would say in the past 3 months, we've probably been approached more than the past 5-6 years by smaller platforms about could we do anything strategically, because they are at that unique point of, do we put equity in to grow the business? Do we put equity in to grow the management team? But I do think it's going to be a slower 25 than we thought. But for all of us, we hope it kind of starts to open up at the end of the year.
From your perspective, given that the future of what happens for platforms like you all is still evolving, do platforms like you all feel like buyers of those mid-sized platforms, or if there's the right opportunity, or are you still doing your acquisitions on the small side? How do you think about that?
We definitely will be involved, and we are getting involved in some of these smaller to mid-sized platforms. I think we have a great reputation for our providers and our partners, and so a lot of the dentists know us. They have friends with us, and so they've talked to, whether that's their executive team or their sponsor. But you are going to see more. I think you have to. Some of these guys have to get creative. Now, for us, it's always balancing. We looked at 2,800 practices last year. So the pricing has to still make sense for us. So, I think that probably has to be a little more reality checks as to what the exit multiple is going to be for those groups. But you are seeing that get closer. I think last week, Smile Doctors did a transaction with My Orthos. Those were very, very rare, but you are going to see more of those just because a lot of these, they're at 7, 6, 8-year hold periods. They've got to do something at some point. And so I think once, a little more time from now, and whether that's the lenders or the private equity firms kind of have accepted, I don't want to say their fate, but, in a way it is, I think you're going to see more and more of these happen.
Yeah. You see a lot of continuation vehicle deals, which that can make sense. And it buys time in that sequence. So we may see that as a stopgap here for a while, but that only takes you so far. Maybe looking down market again, to your eye, what does the smaller side of the market look like? I know you do a lot of acquisitions at that stage as well. Is there still room for more consolidation, especially in a market where you happen to be, or does it run its course and you run out of room for it?
We kind of always wonder that, are you going to see a drop off? And we look at our funnel. Top of the funnel, it's still extremely healthy compared to all the other years. I think there's just less buyers out there right now. A lot of groups are sidelined with whether they're up against covenants or just lack of capital. And, I think we see a little bit still of, I would say, pricing shock, no different than the residential real estate market of, well, I was told a year ago, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I was going to get, we hear the craziest things. We hear a one-off location that's got $400,000 of earnings. I heard I was going to get a 10X. And you're like, well, no, that's not the market. So I think there's a little bit of pricing shock that still is causing a little bit of a slowdown, especially kind of on the broker deals that we see. But, there's still so much consolidation left. We are still, in my opinion, call it the third, fourth inning. We are in their early innings, and there's just the industry as a whole has still a healthy runway ahead of it.
As I look at the market, setting aside some of those macro dynamics, I see lots of platforms, and some of them are doing well. The M&A market can be kind of uncertain, but kind of within their business, they're doing well. and others that are pretty dramatically floundering. What's the through line on some of those that are not doing well? Is it leadership? Is it structure? What would you attribute that to?
Yeah, I think typically it's one of two things. It's you don't have a proper alignment model. It's really, really hard to win in this game. I mean, at the end of the day, it is, do your providers and your doctor partners, are they motivated? Are they aligned? I think secondarily, we see a ton of those groups that were simply put in this market as a financial arbitrage play. We always tell everyone, and we tell ourselves daily, like, we've got to create value for our owners, which means we've got to make their lives better. We have to make the best place to work. And then obviously we have to financially benefit them. And so many of these groups, we're just going to gobble up 20 practices, 30 practices, 40 practices, duct tape it together and sell it. I'm going to buy these practices for 8, we're going to sell for 12. Interest rates doubled, performance, maybe volume dipped, and they never built out a proper infrastructure to actually provide that value. And so they're stuck. And so I think the groups who purely relied on that financial arbitrage are just, which I guess goes into lack of leadership, are stuck. And those are the ones you're seeing, get turned over back to the lenders and the banks.
Yeah, I'd also say that a number of practices didn't remain laser focused on the basic economics of the proposition to the providers, in the sense of it's like business school 101 in negotiation, and retention is a negotiation just like acquisition is a negotiation. And the basic business school is always know what your negotiating partner's BATNA is, their best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And by that, I mean not having laser focused on what the current compensation take home of your providers is vis-a-vis what they could do elsewhere. And if you lose track of that for a second, then there's not enough culture to carry you for very far. In some of the deal structures, it became kind of conventional wisdom that, you can scrape 30% of whatever they were making and slap a multiple on that and everything's going to be great. Well, maybe not. And the maybe not is if you scrape that much economics out, because that's going to be your go-forward comp, if that has landed everybody at a non-competitive spot, you're going to be in trouble. And I saw that play out time and time again.
Totally agree. I mean, we lost out on a ton of deals, especially in the heyday of post-COVID, call it 22, early 23, when we would see doctor compensation underwritten at the lowest, like way below market values. And we always struggle with that. We're like, two reasons. One, you touched on it. Eventually, they're going to be like, why? Like, I went from making X to X minus a lot. And over time, that gets old. I think the second thing was, if something happens to them, we couldn't go out and hire someone at that rate. And we knew what was happening. Yeah, they were juicing EBITDA. Like, we know the game, but to be sustainable long-term, we have to be very steadfast. And again, like you said, are we the best alternative? We have to be the best place for them throughout all times. And so, that was a frustration for us. And now you're kind of seeing it come full circle. They're seeing the effects of that.
Justin, it's always fun to talk to you. You guys have been kind of a market leader in so many ways. You pioneered, and I've done a little bit of work with you on this, pioneered the whole joint venture model that has been the real driving force in the industry. So you guys are a beacon on a hill in a lot of ways. And it's been great to watch your guys ride. And this has been a ton of fun having you on the show.
Appreciate it greatly and look forward to the future.
Thank you for joining us on this installment of the Corner Series. To learn more about today's discussion, please email host Geoff Cockrell at gcockrell@McGuireWoods.com. We look forward to hearing from you. This series was recorded and is being made available by McGuireWoods for informational purposes only. By accessing this series, you acknowledge that McGuireWoods makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this installment. The views, information, or opinions expressed are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect those of McGuireWoods. This series should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice from a licensed professional attorney in your state and should not be construed as an offer to make or consider any investment or course of action.